Hello, everyone. Welcome to Living One. My name is Olivia, and I'm so glad to welcome all of you to another year of great Living One conversations. For those of you who don't know, Living One is Carrilos's monthly webinar series, now in its sixth year. With guest speakers from around the world, we listen in to how people are bringing their ethics, minds, and lives into alignment with nature for earth and animal liberation and revitalization. Our first series of 2025, Attending to the More Than Human World, explores the ethics of attention, why it matters when we unhook our minds and attention from human privilege and ground ourselves in the perspectives of animals, plants, rivers, seas, and forests. Over the next 2 months, 6 incisive thinkers offer thoughtful and practical guidance on how to pay deep and loving attention to animals, plants, and the earth. Join us for another year of rich conversations to learn how, individually and in community, we can take the necessary, concrete, timely steps towards a world of peace and wellness for all Earth beings. Our guest today is Silvia Caprioglio Panizza. Silvia is a philosopher working on moral psychology, interested in attention, impossibility, perception, trust, and all the ways in which we meet and fail to meet the world. She likes to travel and has worked broadly as a lecturer and researcher. She is the author of The Ethics of Attention, Engaging the Real Iris Murdoch and Simone Weil, co-editor of the Murdochian Mind, and co-editor and co-translator of Simone Weil's Venice Saved, and Mirror of Obedience. Non-human animals, how to do them justice, and how to make the world a better place for them are at the center of much of her thinking. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are all currently on various different Indigenous lands. I am currently on the ancestral homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, which includes the Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi. This land exists also as a place of trade with other Indigenous communities, including the Ho-Chunk, Miami, Menominee, Sauk, and Meskwaki. The Carrillo Center for Nonviolence is located on the homelands of the grizzly bear, Takelma, Dakubetide, coyote, coho salmon, golden eagle, and gray wolf. Finally, we ask that all of us participate with full respect and attention to each other in the spirit of peace and wisdom that Living One seeks to foster. And without further ado, we welcome Silvia and Izzy.
Hello, I'm really delighted to welcome Silvia Caprioglio Panizza to this series as our first speaker on attending to the more than human world. I met Silvia when I was at a conference at the University of Vienna and was absolutely astounded when I discovered that she had written a whole book on the ethics of attention, which I'd only read a couple of papers and it had already really inspired me. So I begged her for a PDF copy of her book, read it, was even more inspired. And as soon as Gay said to me, "What do you think might be a good series for Living One?" It was The Ethics of Attention, and the first name on my list was Silvia's. So I'm absolutely delighted that she can join us all here this evening, or this morning, as it is for many of you. And I'd like to hand over now to Silvia for your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be part of this fantastic organization. And thank you, Izzy, for inviting me. As she mentioned, we met at this conference, which was already quite inspiring, but I was also very captivated by her energy and the ways in which she talked about non-human animals with a directness that not a lot of academics can manage. So I'm very happy to keep this contact going and to learn from her and from all of you about attending to, by, with other animals. I know that there's an exercise that's been circulated, so I'm hoping to get your input about what happened when you engaged in the exercise. But I think that the plan here is that I'll be talking for about 25 minutes and give you a kind of introduction to what I understand to be the ethics of attention and the theoretical background for thinking about attention ethically. And then I will very shortly introduce the application of the ethics of attention to non-human animals. But I will not say very much about that. I also think that there was some material being circulated, but I'm not going to assume that anybody's actually read it. Is that correct?
There was the introduction to your book, and
That's right.
also Attending Like a Dog. The exercise will be sent out after your talk, so once people have got the benefit of your talk. But anything that comes up, I will pass on to you as feedback, because I know they're interested to find out.
Yes, please. Okay. All right. Yeah. So then the part in which I will talk more about attending to animals specifically will be drawn from this paper that you may or may not have read yet. And I'll just start sharing my screen. I have some not very attractive PowerPoint. I hope you can bear with me, but okay, slideshow. Okay, can everybody see the PowerPoint? Excellent. Okay, so the basic ideas are really in this slide, and they're coming from the book whose introduction has been inflicted upon you. I don't know to what extent the introduction manages to clarify what I take to be the most important idea of the ethics of attention. But attention is a concept that has been, for various reasons, become the center of a lot of academic investigation. One of the reasons is, of course, that technologies seem to be changing and stealing, as some are claiming, our attention from us. But definitely our patterns of attention and our objects of attention are changing. And people in the political, social, and philosophical world, I think, have become very aware of the fact that this change in our patterns and objects of attention is not innocent. And it has consequences for how we live, how we think, and how we act. My thinking about the ethics of attention specifically, however, didn't start from that. It didn't start from technology or from any perceived change. It actually started from an awareness of the lack of attention that we tend to bring specifically to non-human animals, and to the non-human animals that we use, that we eat, that we exploit on a daily basis. There seems to be a very clear refusal to pay attention to the creatures, the individuals that are behind the resources that we consume on a daily basis. And this is something that struck me many years ago, before I started my PhD, when I was thinking about attention. It seemed like it wasn't a refusal to acknowledge the value of animals. It wasn't even a disagreement with the fact that animals have value or with the idea that we should respect them. It was the lack of attention that, as I saw it, drove the behavior and still drives the behavior of, well, the majority of us who do engage in animal exploitation in many ways. Well, in fact, all of us do, because to some extent, it's inevitable. And this got me thinking about, well, what is it about attention that has such a strong motivational and consciousness shaping potential? And so I embarked in this research, which ended up in this book many, many years later. And there are many stories that we can tell about the moral impact of attention. There are more basic stories that we can tell about the fact that, well, if we don't attend to something, then we'll never know what that something is, and therefore we'll never be able to reason about them properly or think about them and then act upon the information that we have. And this is a very basic instrumental sense of attention. And this is true, and it is important, but it's not the understanding of the ethics of attention that interests me. Reading two authors who have engaged with the idea of attention as important to morality, Iris Murdoch and Simone Weil, I came to the conclusion that there is something inherent in attention that is morally significant. In other words, it's not just how we employ our attention or how our attention is captured, what it is that captures our attention or what it is that we direct it to, but it is attention itself that is morally significant. And I want to stress this because this is by no means an accepted idea, even within the context of attention studies. It's typically more interesting to focus on what we attend to, why we attend, and then what happens is a consequence of attention in certain ways and to certain objects. But what I drew from Weil and Murdoch is that attention itself is morally significant and, in fact, morally good. So this view can be articulated in two ways. And these are two components of attention that together make up the moral quality of attention as I see it. The first, and in fact the fundamental view, is that attention is inherently truth-seeking. If you think about when we're paying attention to anything, even when our attention is captured by a loud noise in the street, there's something we need to know. There's something we don't know yet. Whenever we're directing our attention, we are doing that with the not explicit purpose of finding something out. If we already know, we don't need to attend. If we're not interested, we do not pay attention. Attention has at its core the idea that there is an external reality out there about which we need to find something out. And if we want to take this basic idea of attention towards a more existential dimension, we can say that because of its truth-seeking element, attention is a way of joining the world. Now, well, you might ask, well, we are in the world. Why do we need to join it? Well, our consciousness doesn't always work that way. And this is, again, one of the main intuitions of Iris Murdoch and Simone Weil, which is less controversial as a claim. A lot of the time, we are prey to a series of distractions and ruminations and filters and veils that we put between ourselves and reality. We see things as we want them to be, or as we fear them to be, or as we expect them to be. Our culture, desires, and individual personality, all of that makes up a separation between ourselves and the world, which attention breaks. The other side of this thought is that attention, therefore, is a way of, as Iris Murdoch puts it, unselfing, meaning that it's a way of breaking through all of these factors that, according to Murdoch, mostly come from self-concern or ego, that make it difficult for us to join the world truthfully, objectively, as it actually is. And this makes it easier for us to explain why attention makes us morally better, insofar as every single act of attention is necessarily also a way of unselfing. But also we can think about attention as a way of character formation, so that the more we attend, the better we become at attending, the more unselfed we become, the less self-concerned we will be, and therefore, again, the better at attending we will be. So there is a virtuous circle going on here. Parallel to each of these two dimensions of attention, which I think is probably becoming clearer why I'm calling an existential ethical view. The kernel of the view is that attention allows us to join reality, but we need to believe that joining reality is itself a morally good thing. And this is a view that Murdoch and Weil take from Plato, for whom the whole pilgrimage of human life is a way of progressively becoming more and more truthful, seeing things as they are, driven by the desire for the good. Now, this is quite a lot, and we can come back to that. But the basic intuition is that living in the world, meaning seeing things as they are and wanting to see things as they are, is the foundation of morality, not just instrumentally, but it is in itself valuable. So parallel to these two dimensions, as I mentioned, is the idea that attention is eros. So there is a positive, and I mean logically positive, not evaluatively positive. There is a positive movement of eros, which is here understood as desire for reality. Eros, in a Platonic sense, is a form of desire for the truth, desire for reality. It can be manifested as desire for other bodies, other minds, other things, beautiful things, but in and of itself, it's just the desire to join reality and to know it and understand it. So this is the positive, the energetic dimension. The negative, again, as I stressed, logically negative dimension of this view of attention is connected with unselfing. And this is what Simone Weil calls décréation, decreation. In the very act of aiming to join reality, of paying attention, in other words, in the very act of eros, we are at the same time moving away from self-concern, from all of the concerns that constitute, according to Simone Weil, our self. And we're moving away from it. Attention is often described as a turning around in this Platonic sense, as looking away from something. So it is a movement, but it's also a circular movement. It's a movement of moving away from something and towards something else. This is, of course, a metaphor because we do not actually move away from ourselves. But what actually happens is that in doing that, in becoming concerned, desirous of reality, then our concern with ourselves will cease. And according to Simone Weil, this has also ontological repercussions because our very idea of self is constituted by this inward-looking desire. So this is a further step that we don't need to take if we don't like the metaphysics there. In a more ordinary sense, it is true, and it seems to be true, that whenever we're properly paying attention and desiring something else, then the self-concern that we most of the time habitually are prey of starts to cease, gets dismantled progressively. So here are the two philosophers that I am drawing on in case you've never seen them. Iris Murdoch on the left and Simone Weil on the right. Simone Weil here is pictured when she joined the resistance movement in Spain for the liberation of Spain. So she was very much not just a philosopher, but also a woman of action. And here is Simone Weil, here's Iris Murdoch and a picture of Simone Weil. And Iris Murdoch is starting, in a sense, the project of the ethics of attention, when she says that Simone Weil said that morality was a matter of attention, not will. We need a new vocabulary of attention. And I think we cannot overstate how revolutionary this is, because the idea that morality is based on the will is something that is extremely deeply rooted in Western philosophy. To have a good will, coming from Kant, means to be moral, and it all relies on the exercise of the will. And Weil and Murdoch, slightly more systematically following her, are trying to redirect our thinking away from that. And they're telling us that, well, actually, sure, the will does play some kind of role. But if you really want to engage in what morally motivates us and moves us, you have to look at attention. You have to look at the ways in which we think, the ways in which we desire, and the ways in which all of that shapes our interactions with the world, before even the will gets any say. So I'm presenting here attention as a basic moral phenomenon. And by basic, I don't mean simple. I mean that it actually has an impact on all consciousness, unlike the goodwill, which can make its appearance or not. It has an impact on the objects of consciousness, of course, but also on the quality of consciousness. Whether we attend, how much we attend, how often, and what we attend to is going to shape our general state of consciousness in very specific ways. I also mean, with attention as a basic moral phenomenon, that attention is always a possibility for us. Some people are worried that this makes it overly demanding because at any moment we can fail to attend or pay attention. I don't want this to become moralistic because even Murdoch and Weil are very clear that we cannot be attending all the time. And yet, at any point, it is always a possibility for us. So we have to accept this burden, forgiving ourselves for not always living up to it. But being aware, which can be exhilarating, that at any moment, no matter where we have been in our consciousness up until now, we have the possibility of attending and therefore of joining reality from which we may have precluded ourselves from living in. And finally, what I mean by attention as a basic moral phenomenon is that the very act of attention itself is enough to constitute moral success. This is not the whole story of morality. I don't mean that to attend is enough to discharge all of our moral duties. But what I mean is that to attend is already a moral act, is already a moral movement. If we don't want to call it an act, it's controversial. So all of this is based on this basic idea that I stressed at the beginning of attention as what Brian O'Shaughnessy has called a reality detector. And it doesn't really matter what forms of attention we are practicing. In psychology, there is a distinction between focused attention and diffuse attention, focus being more narrowly focused on a specific object, whereas diffuse attention is something that you can pay to a room, to a situation, to something a bit broader. Although the distinction between the two is not very clear because there is always a possibility of opening up and narrowing down. Attention can be talked about as selective or divided when we seem to be attending to more than one thing at the same time, although apparently it's not actually possible to do that. There is sustained attention. There are various forms of attention, but this basic moral element of attention is there in all of these forms. And here we get to something which is a little bit tricky, because you may want to say, but surely there is bad attention. Surely I may attend to somebody with the intention of finding out what their weaknesses are so that I can exploit them. And of course, this can happen, but I don't think that means that the attention itself is bad. I don't think that means that there is such a thing as bad attention. I think there is attention which is animated by the wrong intentions. And there is attention which began with the wrong kinds of desires. But if you're actually attending, meaning if you're actually truth-seeking, then you will no longer be in control of what it is that you find. And therefore, even attention that begins with a bad intention, if it transforms into attention, is itself a morally valuable activity. So what I want to distinguish here is between what initiates the attention, the desire, the intention, the goal of the act of attention. We're assuming that we're paying attention intentionally, which is not always the case. And the act of attention itself, which necessarily requires a giving up of our intention or desire, because if you want to find out what is there, you have to not be seeking, as Simone Weil puts it. You have to not be expecting something. Otherwise, you will only find what you're looking for, and it is not attention, because it's not truth-seeking. So here the will plays an interesting role. I don't want to say that the will has no role in attention. I think maybe in the way that I presented it earlier, it seemed as to stark a contrast. We can, of course, want to attend, will to attend. Again, as an initiation of the act of attention, we can will ourselves to stop attending to something and attend to something else. But in the moment of attention, the will has to be passive. It has to be something that allows something to happen rather than makes something happen. Okay, there are, of course, other benefits of attention, which I will mention just very briefly because these are not what interests me the most here. There's virtue development. Of course, you can become better at attending and therefore become a more attentive person. Note the difference between to attend and to be attentive, which has very different connotations in our vocabulary. There is the benefit of attention as structuring our consciousness in specific ways so that they will become more concerned, maybe with specific objects. If we spend a lot of time attending to nature, then it will become more salient to us and it will become more careful towards natural, more careful towards nature. So we will structure our consciousness and our whole focus and concern in specific ways. Attending to good people, good animals, good things can be a source of inspiration. If we allow them to properly fill our consciousness, then they may communicate to us specific ways of being that we are being more able to incorporate within our thinking and our approaches. But none of these, I think, capture what is really exciting and ethically fundamental to attention, which is its capacity to take us out of ourselves, join the world as it really is, through a basic inherent desire for truth, which we all carry within ourselves whenever we pay attention, even if we don't know it, and even if it's not an intentional desire for the truth. So here is Weil, who says it quite beautifully. She says that attention consists of suspending our thought, leaving it detached, empty, and ready to be penetrated by the object. Our thought should be empty, waiting, not seeking anything, but ready to receive in its naked truth the object that is to penetrate it. And this is a more beautiful way to say what I've been saying. that the act of attention itself is also an act of receiving. It can be motivated by will, but in the moment of attention, then we are open to be affected emotionally and cognitively by what is out there. And anything else is not actually an act of attention. And here is Murdoch taking the same words and rephrasing the ideas in a more Platonic language, talking about attention as the disturbing magnetism of truth. So truth is magnetic. Truth is something that we desire, whether we know it or not. And in an earlier essay, she says that the direction of attention is contrary to nature, outward, away from the self, which reduces all to a false unity, towards the great surprising variety of the world. And the ability so to direct attention is love. And love, let's be careful, understood in the Platonic sense of eros, not in the romantic or interpersonal love, although it can manifest in those ways too. But it's more basic than that. And here she's also expressing an important thought, which is that attention takes us towards the great surprising variety of the world. It will surprise us. By definition, it will surprise us, but it will also take us towards something that has variety, that is new, that is complex and multifaceted. Whereas our own ruminations and self-concern tend to be very boring. And if nothing else convinces you about the ethics of attention, then maybe this will be it. It's just boring to be immersed in our own self-concern because it reduces everything to some kind of comforting narrative to allow us to go on as we already know. So to conclude, because I think I've already gone on a bit too long, I want to talk about attending and animals, because that's why we're here. But hopefully everything I've said so far is already intuitively applicable to other animals and to nature more broadly. And I mentioned that I've started thinking about attention in relation to animals, but I think that way of thinking about attention was fairly narrow. And more recently, I've been trying to think about not just how to attend to animals, but also how to be attended to by animals and attending with animals, and to look at the ways in which animals themselves pay attention and what that means for our own understanding of attention. Because unfortunately, most of our concepts are extremely anthropocentric. We have studied the human for a long time. We haven't studied animals for that much time. So we don't actually know enough about animals. And we tend to just apply the concept as we know it from the human to the animal and then be disappointed if it doesn't fit. Well, of course, we need something better, right? We need to do justice to animals in different ways. And attending to animals, as the title of this talk mentions, which we haven't actually got to yet, is indeed transformative. Although what it is that gets transformed can be interpreted in various ways, and we can talk about that. I have said that in a sense, it doesn't matter what it is that we attend to, insofar that any act of attention can be a moral success. But in another way, of course, it does matter what we attend to, insofar as in any situation, there will be something which is more salient, more important, that deserves our attention more. And especially in the diachronic sense, if we consider what our habits of attention are and how they build up our structure of consciousness, as I mentioned earlier, it does matter where it is that we direct our attention to. So there's a Jean. She sadly was my cat for almost 16 years, and she is my teacher in attention. It is with Jean that I learned how to attend better to other animals, although I will always have the feeling that I never attended to her enough. But it's also from Jean that I learned the modes of attention that I'm talking about in the paper that you have and that I want to mention tonight. Because it strikes me from reading about animals, but from my very own experience, that some non-human animals are better than most human animals at paying attention in the morally significant ways that I have just been highlighting. This is one thought. The second thought is that paying attention to the way in which animals pay attention, and attending together with other animals. And in my experience with Jean was the time that we spent together in attentive touch, which is one of the primary senses for her. Not looking into each other's eyes, she didn't like that very much, but touch was a way of attending to each other and attending together to the same thing, which was our touch, our interaction, is an extremely powerfully transformative way, because then we are learning from the animal, not just theoretically how to be better at attending, but our own attention is directed by them and with them to something different. So when I say that animals can be better than human animals at attending, I mean in different kinds of capacities for attention. I think many non-human animals have a greater capacity for sustained attention, not to break the focus towards something else. They have a greater capacity for focused attention, to remain on the object specifically, sometimes for the purpose of action. They have a greater capacity for creative attention, and this is a kind of difficult concept that we find in Simone Weil, but it hasn't really been explored very much, and I'll be happy to talk about it. But if I can try to explain it in a nutshell, it's the capacity for attending to somebody and giving them the kind of space in which that other can identify new possibilities for being, stimulated by your attention. And I can find definitely from Jean's attention to me that this was a case of her allowing me to create something that I didn't have in me before. Fourth, I think other non-human animals have greater capacity for empathetic and responsive attention, and I have some stories to tell about that if you want. And finally, and most strikingly for me, they have a great capacity for encouraging mutual attention, which between humans and from humans is, I think, more deficient. Let me see, what else have I got? Right, so this is my last slide. I can elaborate on any of the points that I mentioned because I know I went very, very quickly, but here is a kind of summary of the ways in which attention with, to, and from non-human animals can generate a moral transformation in us. The first and perhaps more obvious is that if we talk about unselfing in attention, of course, we can also talk about a species unselfing in attention, in that attending to and with non-human animals, we will be able to break through some of the anthropocentrism that we carry with us at all times by becoming more curious and receptive to other forms of attention. Secondly, as I mentioned, attending with non-human animals will help us exercise different attentional sensory modalities. We are very focused on sight. Almost the vast majority of the studies on attention are focused on sight. But sight is not the primary sense for a lot of other animals. And some have argued that it's not actually primary for humans either. So animals can recover this sense with us. Thirdly, joint attention, attending together with other animals to something else that we're both attending to, can allow us to see the world at least partly from their perspective. So to see what they're seeing, to take us to something that we wouldn't notice without their company. Fourth, joint and mutual attention, so not just attending together to something, but also attending to each other, means interpreting reality together, because attention is something that doesn't last typically for just 1 second, it goes on. And the way that attention is modulated together means responding to a reality interpreted in a certain way. And finally, it can more consciously give us a new kind of self-understanding, not just as species. Jacques Derrida already said a lot about that in his essay, which started from his cat seeing him naked coming out of the shower and him realizing that the cat was a subject, and then going through the whole history of Western philosophy to discover that we actually haven't paid attention to animals as subjects, but also new self-understanding as individuals. And the way that attending with animals can do that is by going through all of these different structures of attention that I have just mentioned above. I'm going to stop here and thank you for listening. I'll stop sharing.
Silvia, thank you. That was so inspiring, and I have questions, but before I go into the questions, and there will be an opportunity for everyone in the audience to pose questions a little bit later. And just one point of clarity: the papers were sent out to those people who signed up for the companion course. So if you were wondering why you haven't received the reading of Silvia's papers, that was specifically for those who've enrolled in the companion course. And I'm glad to see pretty much everyone from the course is here with us tonight. And if they've had the chance to read those as well, they may well be interested to ask questions related to those readings. But you mentioned that you had some specific stories that were related to this empathic, increasing understanding of empathy through attention. And I thought it would be great to give you the opportunity to tell us those stories.
Yes, of course. So in this paper, I go through various examples of animal attention, and two examples which specifically exemplify the creativity and empathy of attention are the story of Clever Hans and of Levinas's dog. Now, Clever Hans was, I don't know how familiar people are with this story, but in case you haven't heard about it, was a horse who lived in Austria during the First World, at the time before the First World War. And his owner was convinced that he could count. And it seemed like he could. He seemed to respond reliably to very difficult mathematical operations on a board placed in front of him by stomping his hoofs a certain number of times. And this created a sensation because the public was convinced that we've discovered that horses are more intelligent than we think. They can count. And then psychologist Fungst started to study Clever Hans. He wanted to find out exactly whether that was true and what the mechanisms were. And he discovered that, or at least he claimed, that actually Hans couldn't count. What he could do was to read the micro-expressions and the emotions of the questioner so well and so closely that he could understand when the questioner was getting a little bit excited because he was coming close to the right answer. Various different forms of emotional understanding. Now, some people have actually suggested that there is still evidence that Hans could count, and that may be true, but what I'm interested in is the fact that once Fungst proved that Hans couldn't count, interest in Hans completely dropped, and he was actually sent to the First World War as a war horse, and he was probably eaten by soldiers or killed in combat. And I think it's astonishing that we value the capacity to count above the capacity for empathetic responses, which Hans seemed to exhibit in an astonishing degree, a much greater degree than most of us would be able to do. And this was through his intense attention to the questioner, but also, interestingly, to a kind of attention that seemed to be able to modulate the questioner's responses without him even realizing that was happening. So Hans was able not only to understand the micro expressions and emotions of the questioner, but also to come into a kind of engagement so that he and the questioner were able to influence each other in their movements and then their emotions. So this is with my first example of animals showing a superior capacity for empathetic attention. The other example is, again, I think fairly well known, at least within philosophy, and that's the story that Emmanuel Levinas, who is known for his ethics based on the face as a recognition of the other. And he is not interested in animals at all. And he's actually claimed a few times that he doesn't think that animals do enter properly the sphere of ethical engagement because they don't have a face in the way that he means it, a face that can be read or responded to in the subtle ways that humans respond to each other's faces. But he tells the story of concentration camps in which he and a group of people were confined. And he talks about how he and the group were completely dehumanized by everyone around them, not just by the guards and the Nazis, but also by the women and the children who lived in the nearby villages and sometimes passed by them. They felt that there was no recognition of themselves as human or on the part of other people. Now, we need to ask, well, what does that mean, a recognition of themselves as humans? But part, at least, of what it means, that there was no recognition of dignity, no recognition of subjectivity, and a recognition of value. They felt that that was just absent. And that, in turn, influenced their own self-perception. They started to think of themselves as just being objects. This is a condition that Simone Weil calls affliction, and she captures very well. And she talks about somebody being turned into inert matter by affliction. So what happened was that after some time in the camp, a dog showed up, and he came back day after day. So the prisoners ended up giving him a name and calling him Bobby. And Levinas describes how Bobby's response to the prisoners showed no hesitation in his recognition of their humanity. And if we believe my suggestion, it meant that Bobby responded to them in ways that showed his recognition of their value, of their subjectivity, and of their dignity. This form of attention can be called creative insofar as the prisoners themselves that stopped believing that those things belonged to them. And through Bobby's attention to them, they were able to see themselves again in a way that they hadn't been able to see themselves before. So these are two stories, examples. They're not from the scientific literature, they're anecdotes, but they're examples in which I think animals show a form of attentional superiority to humans.
Thank you so much. They are powerful examples. How has attending, for you personally, how has attending in the ways that you describe it, taking it on as something of which you're consciously aware, where there is this partial role of the will at least, how has that changed how you feel, how you act, how you see the world? And how do you think the world would be changed were we all to take on board these lessons of attention?
Well, I'm going to disappoint you. I don't know if I have changed so much since I started thinking about attention in this more systematic philosophical way. I'm certainly much more aware of my failures of attention. That I'm absolutely clear. And of course, becoming more aware of your failures means that you will be in a better position to combat them, to catch them, to try to counteract them. But again, we have a negative movement here. You catch yourself and you see yourself not attending properly to a person, situation, animal. But attention cannot be commanded. And I guess through my failure, I've learned yet another lesson, which is that you can decide to attend, you can will to command, you can will to attend, but whether attention is actually going to happen is not entirely under our control. And the forces of the ego and self-concern are indeed extremely powerful, more powerful than I would like to think. But this is why Simone Weil talked about grace as the response to an act of attention. You desire it, you can will it. You can, of course, train it and put yourself in the way of becoming more attentive. But if it's going to happen, it feels in a sense like grace. It's not entirely up to us. On a more positive note, however, I think that reflecting on attention and forms of attention and inattention has allowed me to single out what I have been calling attention, which I'm aware may be a subset of what others may consider to be attention, and to value it more, which means that when attention does happen, when it works, it is more ecstatic because it's allowed me to abandon myself to it, to practice the sort of negative form of the will that I was talking about more confidently, because I think that I am better aware of what it is that is happening, and therefore it is a fuller, more joyous, more ecstatic encounter. And that also means to connect the sense of the ethical with a sense of the existential demand. the idea that this encounter with the real is not just something that can change your perspective and can happen to you in the course of your life, but it's actually good. It's something that is desirable, and the good and truth are, in fact, going hand in hand. Whether we can all attend properly all the time, I think, well, even Simone Weil, who was perhaps as earnest and as extreme as they come, said that you can't attend all the time. You just cannot do it. You need to take breaks. It's exhausting. And more importantly, both Murdoch and Weil agree on the fact that attention is actually unnatural. They think that we have a natural tendency towards self-concern, towards falsifying, towards expecting, towards desiring things from the world, which are all ways of distorting reality. And this is where our natural tendencies go. So every act of attention, Weil says, is a miracle. It goes against this, the way that in which we are. So in that, if that is true, then there can be no expectation that most humans, most of the time, will be attentive. But that doesn't mean that we need to be pessimistic. That doesn't remove the possibility of improvement, of attending more frequently, of directing our attention to better objects. All of that doesn't remove it. But it makes it much more difficult to imagine a world in which attention is like common currency. If we want to try, what would that be like?
Well, you must feel it. You must feel it would matter, and because otherwise, writing the book would be a sort of exercise in futility. And the ways in which you have drawn upon the importance of attention with respect to particularly those non-humans who are exploited does lead me to feel that you think there is a need, or perhaps even a demand, for us to be more attentive.
Absolutely. And I don't think anything I said denies that. I think the answer to the question of what would the world be like if we all attended all the time has to be a pessimistic one. None of that denies that more of us can attend more often, and that has crucial ethical consequences for the way that we live with others. So perhaps I was being a little bit too literal in my response. We can't all attend all the time. That doesn't mean we can't attend more, and we can't attend to more properly. So if the question becomes, what would the world be like if we all practiced attention more, if we all reflected on the ethics of attention more, and if it became better at going what seem to be our natural tendencies away from attention? Perhaps a boring answer would be that, well, we would have more information, even of the uncomfortable kind. We would be better at attending to suffering, to the things that make us feel uncomfortable, that make us feel guilty. And by attending, we would allow those facts and individuals and situations to affect us emotionally, providing us a motivation, for example, for stopping suffering, for changing things, for trying to do what we can to end it. That is one of the outcomes of attending to something that is wrong or unjust or painful. On a more positive note, if we attended more, it would be, I think, very interesting, because there may also be a kind of breakdown of social structures insofar as attention allows us to bring that basic platonic erotic love to anything at all, so that we may feel less bound to our specific contexts and situations and individuals, and we may begin to see that we can be tied by love to all sorts of realities that we never imagined as proper objects of love. And that can be revolutionary. I mean, God knows what would happen socially, ethically, if that happened. In small ways, I think it happens to all of us when we pay attention to something new and unexpected, and we discover that possibility for eros. if that became more widespread and more common, the sky's the limit.
Wonderful. I want to open up to the floor now. And Sylvia, if you got, are you able to stay for an extra 5 or 10 minutes if people are asking? You are. Lovely. So please either release your mic and speak up, or give a hands up. Mary Beth, the first person. So please feel free to ask your question.
Thank you, Izzy. And thank you so much, Sylvia, for this presentation. It was really wonderful. And I did read your papers beforehand, so but it was still lovely to hear you tell the story of Hans the horse and Bobby the dog. I had a couple questions, but let me just ask you this one because it's the most troubling for me. In general, I'm attending to wild animals where I live, and I write about our relationship with the more than human world. But the trouble, the thing I run into is my human filters getting in the way, and how do you have some ideas about how to remove those filters? In your talk, you mentioned, I think it was Iris Murdoch who said to remove the filters. How? Any ideas?
Thank you. Do you have another question, or shall we just? Yeah. Okay.
I do, but I'll wait. I don't want to take all the time.
Yeah. So I think depending on whether we're listening to Iris Murdoch and Simone Weil, Murdoch does not think that we need to remove all filters. She thinks that there are parts of who we are, constitutive of who we are, and humanity is one of them. And I think sometimes we can overstate how big a part of who we are humanity is, by which I mean that there are filters and differences that remove me from others that are not necessarily part of my common humanity, but maybe part of my specific history, my subjectivity, my own experience. And it's also easy to overstate how much we understand each other amongst humans, and I think we actually very often don't. So humanity being one of the filters, anthropocentrism specifically being one of the filters, or human supremacy specifically being one of the filters. And what I mean by that is that if we believe Iris Murdoch, there are good and bad filters. There are filters that we just cannot do without. They are our way of approaching the world. Kant would say that space and time, these are categories through which we make sense of reality. Reality itself may have no time in it, or not time as we know it, but we cannot make sense of it without it. And we don't tend to think about it as a problem or as a filter that actually veils our perception of reality. And in a parallel fashion, there are parts of who we are that we use in order to join reality rather than removing ourselves from it. For example, eros is something that I feel as a subject, as an individual, but it is that which allows me to join reality. Care is something else that allows me to see more of the object, and yet it is an emotion, which is part of me, part of my history. Knowledge sometimes allows me to see more. We can take it as a filter, of course, because it's something that I am putting into what I'm looking at. But let's say knowledge of cat anatomy will allow me to better understand what's wrong with my cat when she's sick. And yet this is knowledge that I've inherited previously, and now I'm applying. And it's human knowledge, and it comes from human framing, but it is a positive filter. The philosophical term would be cognitive penetration for all of that knowledge and character traits and capacities that we can use to know the world better. So on this view, you don't have to be naked in front of the world. You don't have to be a naked pair of eyes in front of the world in order to see it. Now, of course, then there are bad filters. That there are filters that put distance between us, that distort the world. And those are the ones that we need to work against. And I understand that when we're trying to approach non-human animals, our humanity starts to feel more like the second kind of filter rather than the former. It can feel more like a burden because it seems to be preventing us from properly engaging with them. But we will accept, of course, that whatever kind of engagement we'll have with them, it will be as humans, but that's only one of the many things that we are. also as tactile beings, as emotional beings, as beings with a specific history that we have. And all of those things can be either conducive to more truthful engagement or less truthful engagement, which we also need to see as in progressive forms. So there is no end point of proper, complete truthfulness and complete encounter. It's always an improvement. How far can I remove the impediments once I have recognized them? So I would be interested to know what are the specific filters that come from your humanity that you feel are impediments. And I think then, we can work more specifically with those. The other story, which I will tell very briefly, it is the one that Simone Weil tells, which is just that anything that comes from ourselves is the filter. She does aim for a total perfect encounter of ourselves with reality. Do we have to take it metaphorically? Because in a sense, we know that's not possible. Do we have to take it as a mystical aspiration, perhaps? It's very appealing. But for Weil, there's a very different story to tell here, because anything that is part of us, what's our humanity, our history, our situatedness, our emotions, all of that is actually an interference with reality. And that's a lot harder to make sense of. I don't know if I've answered your question constructively, but there's a lot of theoretical background here that.
That's great. Thank you. It's much more complicated, basically. There's good and bad filters, right? And I like that you said that it's progressive, like there's not some endpoint that one can reach. And I would guess that it's just a matter of practice, like anything else, that the more you practice it, the more you're able to be present. It's easier with some beings like animals than it is with others like trees. The more different they are from us, the harder it is, I think, to not have those filters block what might be happening.
Thank you, Mary Beth. Katerina, you've put a question into the chat. Do you want to raise that?
I just wanted to elaborate a bit. I think we get stuck sometimes in this intellectual way of thinking of attention and not doing it more in an embodied way. So I think by creating awareness of it, that might give us a way out somehow. I'm just thinking out loud, basically.
I'm reading your question. Isn't the awareness where filter the point, or the thing that helps us put them aside at least a bit, and also helps us let go of the act of attending and be more embodied and do more of the art of attending? Thank you. I appreciate that philosophy can remove us from the phenomenon itself that we are trying to investigate. I am aware of that. So I think self-knowledge, self-awareness, knowing what your impediments are is helpful, and it's very important, because when we ask ourselves the questions, am I seeing things in this way because I'm afraid? Am I seeing things in this way because I have this experience that leads me to frame things in this way? Am I not responding to the situation appropriately because I don't have enough familiarity with, animals or whatever is in front of me? That is a very powerful way to start dismantling these, what we've been calling these filters.
Because we think about how an animal, a non-human animal, would attend. They wouldn't do it through intellectualization or...
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that means that self-awareness is one path that can make us better at attending. It does not guarantee that we will actually then be able to attend, even if we know that we have these filters, and which is the disappointing answer that I gave earlier. You can spend 10 years thinking about attention and still not always be successful. And it is not attention itself. The moment that you're reflecting on your own filters, you're not paying attention to what's in front of you. So self-attention can be an exercise towards becoming, self-awareness can be an exercise towards becoming more attentive, but it is not attention. So absolutely, we need to cultivate less self-conscious ways of being present. The act of attention itself is neither an intellectual act nor a self-aware act. All of these things can be paths toward it, but the act of attention is just the act of attention. And something I want to stress is that sometimes attention can occur without our desire for attention. Despite us, we can be captured by something. Murdoch has a beautiful example, but actually it's a very problematic example of seeing a kestrel outside of her window. And she hasn't planned it, she hasn't asked herself any question, but she's just captured by this kestrel. And she's fully there. And everything else she was thinking about before has just disappeared. And this puts very strong limits to our agency in attention. Not complete limits, because we still want to have a sense that we can improve it, train it, but we do have strong limits to our agency. And it's a blessing, I think, that attention can come completely from the outside without our assistance. I think it reinforces the idea of attention as something that takes us towards the world, and also sometimes from the world.
Thank you. Have we got some more hands to raise, or people just want to unmute themselves? I was thinking, you mentioned the term. Oh, Anne, are you? Yes.
Yeah, I was actually thinking that your work helps me to articulate an experience I had and have yet to repeat of attending a witnessing event to bear witness to pigs on their way to slaughter. And it was an extremely deep experience to look into their eyes and to know where they were going, and to recognize that they saw us, they saw me, and the moment of saying, I see you, I don't want this either, and I'm sorry, was profound. What was more surprising was we were at a corner. The trucks would come off the highway. They had to stop at a stop sign and then turn left to go to the slaughterhouse that was just down the street. We happened to be there on a very hot day at shift change, which none of us had thought about. And there were cars coming off of the expressway, 90 degrees out, windows down because their air conditioners didn't work, in a very white rural part of the mid-United States. And most of the people were of color. And I thought they would be mad at us. And so the first few cars I turned away from, and then realized that they were asking for our help. And then started attending to the people. And they were people who were forced into this job because there are no others, because they were felons, because of a whole bunch of reasons, and wanted other jobs. And so the whole idea, I mean, that shifted my perspective so profoundly, not only about, I expected some of what I felt in the connection with the pigs. I did not expect that, nor did I expect the transformation in how I think about the people who work in that industry. And I've not been able to articulate it. I still can't, but your work helps. So I wondered, my question had to do with the juxtaposition of paying attention and bearing witness, and how similar, or if I'm making sense, I guess.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the story. And if I may say so, also thank you for your tears, because it's a very powerful example of something that I've been trying to say when I talk about the transformative nature of attention. I take what you describe as bearing witness as an act of attention. It seems to be that it has all of the characteristics of attention. And the way you told the story shows how even just that moment seems to have changed you. It's affected you. It's still with you today. And I don't know how long it lasted temporarily, but see how big an impact that moment of attention has on the way you see the world, animals, the emotions that are associated, maybe your desire to change things for the better again. So in a way, going back to Izzy's question earlier, which I responded disappointedly. What if more people did that? How powerful would that be? 5 minutes of bearing witness to pigs being sent to slaughter, which is a moment that encapsulates so much of the pigs' lives and of the system and everything, that all the injustice and the deep distress that goes into it. That very moment at the border between life and death, being able to share it with them, which is also extremely difficult, being willing to actually be there and feel the fear of somebody at the end of their life and wonder what it's like to come to the end of your life and knowing that there is nothing you can do is one of the most crushing things anyone can do. So having the courage to attend, and we haven't talked about the courage to attend, but there is courage in attention, is clearly transformative. And what I also found beautiful about your story is that attention trickles down towards other people as well. You started with the pigs, and then you saw another kind of injustice, and you were able, and I think because of the attention that you pay to the pigs, you're also able to pay a better kind of attention to the humans involved in this business. Which shows that attention is a way of opening up that can last and can triangulate. We can attend with others to something else and understand how others are affected only when we're attending to something together. So this is an extremely rich story. I don't remember what the question you asked, because I'm myself quite moved by what you told me, and thank you so much for it. If there was a question that I haven't answered, can you please repeat it?
No, you answered the question. It was just how similar are those two events? And yes, thank you.
Those kind of stories, and Anne, you've already shared one with us in our previous meeting, and I think these stories of attending, of connection, of communication, communion, the encounters, they are part of what these webinars and indeed the companion course are all about, enriching that sense of there being this world full of other persons, not all of whom are human, and just thickening the sense of our moral responsibility and our and that idea of eros. I hadn't fully understood that the distinction between love and eros, and so when Iris Murdoch talks of loving attention, presumably she's talking of erotic attention in that desiring way, rather than me thinking it was a kind of touchy-feely attention.
Yeah, sometimes Murdoch uses the word love in different ways. Sometimes she means more ordinarily the concept of love that we have in mind. But I think the reason is that when we think about love, the good kind of love, not the possessive love, not the jealous love, the good form of love, eros is part of it. So what I wanted to stress is that the love that's in attention is not just or necessarily the love that is well-wishing, that is caring. It's primarily the love that wants the object to be what it is. But even if we just take that very simple thought, I'm attending and therefore I just want you to be what you are, nothing but what you are. Well, how much love, as we understand it, is in there? Is a kind of the essence of love, if you like. So we can I think, draw a distinction between eros as this more basic form of love. But when we use the concept of love, I think a lot of the more basic erotic love grows into the more ordinary forms of love that we understand. Respect for the other's reality, not wanting to change, doing justice to what you see in front of you.
And so that is a sort of beautiful idea, that story that you told, Anne, and that idea of the desire for joining with the world in this truth-seeking way, and then expanding this well-wishing type of love is precisely what we're hoping is the sort of motivational force that comes out through the series of talks that we have on attending to the more than human world. So I think that's a really good foundational place that started us off in an incredibly rich talk and a wonderful evening. Just a final chance for anyone to put up their hand or open up their mic. Otherwise, I will thank you, Silvia, from the bottom of my heart for being the person that you are, writing that wonderful book, and such a fortuitous meeting in Vienna. I'm so very delighted that you could join us here this morning in where the Kerelos Centre is, and this evening for me. Thank you very much indeed, and I'll hand over to Olivia to wrap up and make sure that everyone knows what's happening next week. But Silvia, thank you.
Thank you, Izzy, and thank you everyone for joining and for raising questions and telling your stories. I'm touched and I'm moved, and I'm very happy that I've been able to be with you tonight. And congratulations for the work that you do. If you can spread more of this love for animals, then that would be incredible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Silvia. And such a beautiful conversation and such wonderful questions from everybody. Yes, our next Living One speaker will be 1 week from today on February 21st at 10 a.m. Pacific time. We will welcome Eva Meyer, a philosopher, visual artist, writer, and singer-songwriter. As always, if you enjoy Living One and feel called to support Kerelos Living One and all of our sanctuary residents, please consider donating at the link on our website, kerelos.org. If anyone has listened to this talk now and is interested in getting involved in the course, you can reach out to us at contact@kerelos.org, or follow the many links on the website to send us an email expressing your interest, and we can facilitate that. So thank you, everybody. Again, thank you so much, Silvia, for your time and your wisdom, and for everybody for joining us tonight, this morning, this afternoon, whatever time it is for all of you. We look forward to seeing you next